Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman Holiday Month. I am Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
Indeed. And today we're continuing our character discussions, and Holiday Month is by far the hardest time to do character discussions because they're just like... there's only so many of them. So we're definitely going into the point where we're just cheating this year. And so we're kind of like starting to discuss really broad things. And I wanted to discuss elves. Just, yeah, I'll admit I'm getting desperate, but you know what? I'm gonna throw it over to Alfie, and he's gonna help pad out this half-hour episode of Geeky Gentleman.
Call me a padder for fun. It's why I'm here. It's why I'm happy to be here. And in most respects, it's why I'm most curious to maybe kind of pretend that you put more thought into this. Why on God's green earth did you decide to pick out an entire species this time, yeah?
I don't know. Okay, so like, here's the thing. Elves, when you're growing up, you don't think anything of it. It's like, okay, yeah, Santa's workshop is elves. But then as you get older and you get exposed to more things, you find out that elves aren't just like a Christmas exclusive thing. And so this is something I found really interesting. I remember when I was like 6th grade maybe, I was starting to hang out with a new group of friends, and they were all into the fantasy stuff and whatnot. And one of them goes, yeah, I'll be an elf in this game or whatever. And I'm like, really? I guess I should be more of an elf. And they go, why? I'm like, I kind of got pointy ears and I'm short. And they're like, what does short have to do with it? And I had that like moment of pause where you realize you are about to embarrass yourself in front of your cool friends who are all into fantasy lore. Cool new friends who are all into fantasy lore. At that moment where I realized I was about to embarrass myself, like I didn't know of any other elf besides, Santa's helpers kind of shit. So I was like, yeah, like Santa, he's got the short little elves. And they're like, no, we're talking like Tolkien and fantasy with the archers and the beings that live for hundreds of years and shit. And I'm like, that's a thing? So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird connection that has kind of always stuck in my head. And it makes me realize that elves were probably introduced to Santa's lore after Tolkien and after the existence of more high fantasy elves. So, like, why? Why did Santa get elves as helpers? I
think the only possible answer I can provide to you is really relevant to one of our early episodes of this month, which is Odin, who is Norse mythology, is one of the oldest documents we have on where elves come from. And Odin had a bunch of elves and dwarfs, which this is a whole other thing, but dwarfs also come from a different way of saying elf. So it's all, and so do fairies. All of them kind of come from the same source, and then as we've gone with different cultures and added, they've all three have kind of separated. But originally, they were all just different ways of describing a certain type of being, right? Which is maybe where you get like the mix-up with some elves being described as short, whereas most elves in like other mythologies and fantasy lore aren't described as that, but dwarves nearly 100% of the time are short. So you can maybe see why that's some of the connections are made there. Specifically with Father Christmas and Santa, because Odin had both dwarves and elves in his employ who would make weapons or spells or potions, all of this, gifts, really. And that's the only thing I can really imagine being the inspiration for Father Christmas having elves working under him.
That's really interesting. I didn't imagine that the connection to this previous episode would be there. That's so ridiculous. All of holiday month will just slowly go back to Norse mythology. We'll find out. No, I never would have realized that. So I guess that kind of explains why the connection's there. And yeah, I don't know. That was my main source of going there. But I imagine when I picked elves, you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna have so much to talk about." So like, what do you think of for like characteristics or where's something we can go with on elves as the character for Christmas myth?
Well, kind of keeping it strictly to Christmas then, because you can kind of go in so many different directions with interpretations. They're almost as bad as like vampires, with how many fucking rules they're supposed to have that none of them really could follow. But I do find them interesting as they almost always carry with them this sense of either being wholly good, but yet still not trustful, if that makes any sense. The idea that an elf themselves will be this pure being, like the word itself even comes from like white being, and they'll have these strange powers and can help you on your journey, and in the winter they seem to still somehow always be in eternal sunlight and shining and all of this, for like the more typical Tolkien-esque elves. They still never seem to be people you can really watch yourself around, because although they may be a perfect society, they do not see us as that. And you can maybe even tie it to stuff like with Santa's workshop and his own type of elves, which are far less mystical and more akin to just like hard grafting workers who are kind of quirky but always mean well. Even they have a department dedicated for coal. They've got a conveyor belt of that shit.
Right? Like, that's the thing that has always stuck out to me is you got, like, the idea of Santa's little helpers, the elves that, you know, are eternally at the North Pole and they're working on toys all year round, and it's like, there's a lot of stuff done with them that I find really interesting. Like, I really like the stuff where it's, like, the elves are unhappy or the elves are, like, only able to do the one thing. Robot Chicken has that hilarious bit on the Rankin Bass thing where the one elf goes out because he wants to be a dentist, and they actually like show his journey, and he goes and he becomes a dentist, but then he replaces people's teeth with like candy cane fillings and stuff, and it gets him like fired and ostracized, so he goes back to the North Pole since he has no other options. And Santa has him killed because no one gets to leave and then come back. It's like really, really dark, classic Robot Chicken. But like I like that kind of interpretation where like they're really only good at the one thing, or they're so highly specified. Their skills are so highly specific that they can only really do the one thing. Like I like that in the movie Elf with Will Ferrell. They've got that beginning. It's like there's really only 3 occupations for an elf. You can make shoes, you can bake cookies, but doing that in trees not a good scene. And then they just show the tree like catching on fire. Or you can make toys. It's kind of the shows in the elf world, the big show as we call it. And I'm like, God, that's so perfect. So I like that interpretation. There's funny things where like you'll see the elves are on strike, or the elves are like, you know, indentured servants, and they're working like sweatshop conditions sometimes. I like stuff like that really plays with the notion of it, because when you think about the fact that they're making toys for children all over the world. That's like ridiculous. They're helping Santa with all the logistics of sending it out. That it gets pretty crazy and pretty funny. So I like the things that kind of emphasize on that. As far as like when you branch out and you start to go to like other elves outside of the Santa stuff, is where I'm like, so they're just like people. Like Lord of the Rings, it's been a long time since I've seen the movies, so I've never read the books. But like, besides just being really good at shooting things with a bow and arrow, living forever, and having pointy ears, they're basically just people. Like, I don't know, I don't find like fantasy elves in that vein to be particularly interesting in and of themselves as far as like creature features go, you know? It just seems like people except less shit. I don't know, like there's times where things kind of work out a little bit better. Like, I don't know if it's Lord of the Rings or something, but I've seen like fantasy stuff like elves have like higher quickness and better stealth, but they're also like less durable, and so they can like fight and stuff pretty well, but they're not quite as strong, and if they get hit with like a blunt object, their bones just like shatter. I'm like, okay, that makes them slightly more interesting. So they're like people with slightly different stats, you know?
Mm-hmm. I guess just when unpacking that point particularly, I've always thought the thing that's most interested me about them, even though I do mostly agree with you, I find they'd never be a class I normally pick if I was going to do something like that. But I've always really dug the idea of a race that is born into immortality. Mm-hmm. I always think the idea of that as a society and how that would function, I'm sure it's been done, because how could it have not? But going into those type of, how do you function in a place that has no need for reproduction now outside of just like ceremony, or how do they justify it maybe, and all of that is really interesting to me. And then you can get some interesting stuff when you get like almost like an Amazonian thing where they've kind of peaked as a society, that once you've become immortal and you've managed to cure all diseases, where do you go from there? What's the next step? And it takes like the young gun to shake things up. I always think that's a story worth telling, and that interests me about like their rules as a people, but on their own as themselves, I have always found them a bit lacking. I think the design in its simplicity is maybe its biggest weakness, because again, it's just such an easy costume to do with just, I got X pointy ears and fairer skin.
Right?
Like, it's one of those things where it's just like, oh, come on. It's one of you could have gone a bit further with the concept. And sometimes they do. Some artist depictions do go a little crazy with how elves look, and I always appreciate them. But that even makes me prefer almost the stockier, shorter, different hair colors and different appearances of just like, the Santa elves do look like normal people too, but they've also got much more variety in how they look. They don't have to be beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. Like sometimes they've got the like big chunky noses and stuff, or like really rosy cheeks and stuff. Those features are cool. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it's Arthur Christmas. It has like really freaking weird elf designs. Arthur Christmas and what's the other one? It was Netflix. Netflix where Jeff Bridges plays Santa Claus. Shit. That one. Like their elves are, I think, 100% CG, and they're like maybe a foot high, and that's probably counting their pointy hat. Like when you start doing really weird stuff with them like that, I kind of tend to find it a little more interesting, because then it's just, then they become like almost like minions from the Despicable Me franchise, where they're just really stocky and kind of weird, and I don't know, I like that. It's just different and kind of fun and strange. I don't know. It's one of those things. Do you have a favorite depiction of Christmas elves from like a movie or television series or something?
I always found them quite. I think the most one is Alf because it's the time you really kind of get in the perspective of the workforce. And in the Santa Claus, like I think I just tend to lean more to comedic takes for the elves, where it is kind of treated as like a 9 to 5 kind of like that. Like if it's got that kind of vibe, it's just like the really hard ass elves. It's just like we did this for the first 500 years, and you're young, you think you can make an early living, but I got your wife, and you got someone like man, it just takes a toll on you. I really wish I'd been Tolkien elf at that point, and they've got it made. Like the bitter fuckers are what really gets me. Like I think that's a really good point for comedy, like you mentioned earlier. So those would probably be the ones I lean most towards, but I still wouldn't put them as like, oh, that's the only way you could do it. I think as a concept, they've got more to them that still hasn't been tapped into, simply because of the most media that's going to feature them isn't going to take too many risks, because it's not. Rarely do you get a subversive statement Christmas movie, right? It's like, I'm sure there are, but it's by no means. You fund in a Christmas movie, it's normally a safe bet for just like, oh, this will make someone can use this to know they've directed something with a bit of higher budget, just because people know people are going to see it if it's a Christmas movie, right? So I feel like with the idea of like the disgruntled workforce that's brought in with only 1 day a year, and they don't get any of the credit or the profits for it, and yet all they do is like it's the Amazon delivery driver gets all the praise and the food and everything, and they're just like the workforce. Like that's got some weight to it. That's got some real like potential for subversion, and Santa Claus is the villain, and really like rise up fucking Viva la Revolution kind of style. And I even if you don't go that far with it, I think maybe delving into the psychology of like outside, you can keep it a bit comedic because it is a funny concept, but like what does that do to you as a person? And you can even take it to a positive, right? What kind of person do you need to be to work all these hours and slave away at all these things, and yet at the end for you it's going to be worth it year in year out? Like that's a story to me, right? Like that's something you can delve into that I don't really know if it's been tackled with that level of, I guess, playing it straight.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's been things that like touch on it here and there, but yeah, there hasn't been like an adults only Christmas movie that really gets into like the Christmas myth kind of things. At least not one that I can think of that really focuses on that side of things. Like, there have been episodes of some series that have kind of gone for that darker take that I like. I think Fairly Odd Parents did that for a little bit. What else did? I know, like, I think the closest you'll get to that is like Futurama and their take on elves, but that's not quite fair because they're not actually elves, they're Plutonians. But like that's probably the closest to what you're talking about, of like a really dark take on elves where they kind of hate working for Santa, but they're kind of forced to, and they're just like, the victims of capitalist society and stuff like that. That's probably the worst or the harshest take on them, let me put it that way. I do really like those episodes of Futurama that go into the Christmas stuff. That shit's so funny. Robot Santa Claus is fucking hilarious. Other than that, though, I don't know. It's harder to think of good examples of like really subversive elves. Like that does seem like it's just ready for a whole movie or at least like an animated series special. Like that seems like an episode of that's Rick and Morty's Christmas episode right there, Like that'd be perfect for that. I don't know. Yeah, for me, I'm pretty much on the same boat as you, of just liking the more subversive comedic takes on them. As far as like for straight takes, yeah, the movie Elf is pretty good. I also like the what we see of them in Santa Claus the movie from the '80s. Those are pretty good. And you've got again the elf that wants to like strike out on his own and stuff, and that's got some fun to it. It's not the worst thing ever, at least. I don't know if there's like any oh, this isn't my Christmas elf kind of thing. I don't know if there's anything that's like just gotten it super wrong that I can think of.
For some reason, there's something in my head. I don't know what it is, but I remember one where it was they were like evil, or like specifically implied to be naughty children.
That's always been the most fucked up Christmas myth to me, is that Santa Claus kidnaps the bad children and forces them to make the toys. I always, like, it is so demonstrably fucked up in, like, the best possible Eastern European way.
And I'm just kind of like, does this take, if it was ever played upon it in any kind of, it can't be anymore, but do you think that's a step too far? Do you think that is something where it's just like you're kind of getting away from the spirit of what even the darker, more comedic takes still kind of fit? Do you think that's taken to a place where it really shouldn't go? I mean, I'm talking to you, so of course you're gonna be like, no, fuck them, fuck them kids.
That's terrible. No, because I what I think matters is your audience. If it were in like those like moments in the particularly the 80s had this a lot of like the children's movies where suddenly things just got like super fucked up for no reason. Like if we were talking like it was one of those moments in one of those movies, I'd say certainly yeah, that's a bridge too far. But if your audience is for a more adult thing and you're trying to be subversive, I don't think that's going too far with it. You know, like there's a lot I'll probably be willing to allow in parody takes on Santa Claus and that stuff. I don't think you'd be going too far until you get to the like unless you're gonna start implying like, oh yeah, Santa's a pedo or something like that, where you're just trying like too hard to be edgy. Like that's the thing that for me that I would start to get bothered by. But the idea that like Santa kidnaps the naughty children, makes them make the toys, and just calls them elves, I don't know. I think you can get some comedy mileage out of it. It's particularly, I think, more allowable in my mind because it's like it's got actual roots in actual myth. So like I'd probably give it more of a pass just on that justification, if nothing else.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess it's one of those where, like, I know I wouldn't really have a problem with it either, but I can imagine that ruffling some jimmies. I can imagine parents groups taking in arms. How now my child won't sleep because of Santa is scared he's gonna take him away. Like, I can imagine shit like that being something where a lot of people would be like, how dare you ruin this sacred childlike myth kind of thing, right? It's where it's specifically one of those things where it is meant to be only appreciated and aimed at children. So much child focused that the only reason the elves exist is to create stuff for children. Whereas like other mythologies and other elves and stuff you can take darker takes and normally have their own shit going off that like children just find and like have met with like wonder and they're like kind to them and stuff like that. But you can always imply like a darker self. Mm-hmm. Santa and his mythology and world has been so universally created to be so child focused. It is one of those ones where it is a little harder to justify taking it in those directions. Unless you, but at the same time, it's also its strength because then it really is a subversion.
Yeah, exactly. And and again, I'm just gonna stress the point of the audience. Like, I don't think it's a problem to do that if you're doing it in an adult focused audience. But if you were doing it as like a children's movie and you just put that scene in there, yeah, you just ruined Santa Claus for some children, and that's wrong. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those weird things where I'm like, let's. I would say that's kind of a choice where you'd want to be much more thoughtful about how you're going to implement it at the very least. That's going to be my political answer to that one.
Yeah, I could feel that.
Yeah. Other stuff we can talk about with elves. This kind of goes back more to like fantasy elves, I guess. One of my favorite games series is the Jack franchise, and a friend of mine always said, "Oh, those games are so cool because you're like an elf with a gun." And so I'm gonna have to see if I can find like a Christmas-fied version of Jack to put in the thumbnail, just for that reason alone. But yeah, I don't know. That's something that always. If we're gonna talk more about design elements, that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's basically just people, but if you really heighten the ears, it suddenly makes them much more interesting of a design. It's like not just a little tiny pointy ear, it's like all the way out. It's like a foot long. I don't know what you'd need an ear like that for, but...
Yeah, he started like, getting too bat-like at that point.
Yeah, I don't know. It's cool. I like it. Jack rules. Jack 2 is like the edgiest design ever, and I love it. Other fantasy elf things. Why are they always archers? Is there any actual background to that, or is it just let's give them something to do?
I mean, I have to think it comes with like the whole class thing, right? Of just them being frailer, so it takes them. They don't directly combat people. They've got like enhanced sight and intense wisdom, and that normally correlates to like really good aim and really good strategy and stuff like that. So I think that lends itself more to archery. At the same time, you've got people like Link, who is like he's not. I forget what the actual name of his species is, but he's obviously like meant to be an elf. From the design and everything, and he's just like designed to be the jack of all trades ass kicker. Like he can do anything. So I really think that's more so when it is treated as more frail, but they want to keep that kind of like, because if you are if you have like a bow and arrow and a sword fight and you're from far enough away, you're probably going to win that fight with ease. So it does tend to give them that. When you're in a sword and sorcery world where the technology is limited, they've got the closest thing to a gun. So they have that like technological advancement, as much as you could call it that.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's fair. I don't know. It's just one of those things. Like it seems just so ubiquitous that like and I guess that's just the influence of Lord of the Rings, right? Just the thing no one talks about and I find interesting is like orcs were a Tolkien creation. Like that they weren't a thing before Lord of the Rings. He made orcs. And yet now they're just so ubiquitous with fantasy. And so I think a lot of Lord of the Rings elements are now just ubiquitous with fantasy. So he made his elves, like when he put them in combat, he had them primarily doing archery. And so now elves are kind of just ubiquitous with archery. Yeah, archery and toy making, those are their things.
I mean, they could kind of, you can correlate those two. Like legit, maybe, I don't know, this is too good an idea not to be done. But like, Santa's workshop under attack, all the owls suddenly whip out bows and arrows. That'd be a fucking great moment.
Coming soon to DVDC, Goku protects Santa's workshop. We'll make it like Seven Samurai. Oh, it'll be so good.
We won't let these fuckers take this land. He's like fucking boom, boom, boom.
Vegeta's there is like, Santa, yes, Darkseid hated him. He gave him nothing but coal every year, and I failed so many times to kill him on Darkseid's orders.
Only Santa has ever made Darkseid no fear. It writes itself, man. It writes itself. And again, I think that works legitimately better than these like the majestic, more human-like elves. Because at that point, you ask, okay, why don't you use a sword? If you're so skilled on a more, or what have you got to lose, right? You've got hundreds of years to train with it. You can get to the point where, especially if you got like a rapier or something, you don't need to be
That's
physically
what I was
strong.
about to say. That's a cool fucking D&D character you just built there, right? Like a fucking elf with a rapier. That's a badass kind of design. I could see the character design work for that. You know?
But like, if you are gonna dedicate to keeping with the archery theme, having them be literally so small and frail, not even like stocky like a dwarf, where they literally can't fight you. Like you could put your hand, they're the body of a child basically. But you give them bows and arrows, and then suddenly you can entirely buy them actually being a threat. Like I think that works better.
Yeah, I can see that. All right. Well, I think that's gonna do it. I apologize we had to stretch as much as we did for this one,
I think we ended on gold there.
yeah, I agree. All right. So, Alfie, who are we gonna be talking about next time?
Well, this one is also kind of a stretch, but I think maybe it could be an interesting stretch. This is one of the other deities who is quite old, but has a very famous festival in December.
Okay.
And that is the Roman god Saturn.
So Saturn.
Yes.
What's his Greek counterpart? Help me out real quick.
Fuck. You're gonna have to go. Oh, Cronus, I think.
Kronos. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Well,
Cronus.
we'll see how this goes. All right. Did the fucking you're Stretch Armstrong and I'm Vacuum Man. That was a 90s toy reference. Yeah, there you go. Everyone, thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Until then, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the champion of the oppressed.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.
Ho, 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 ho! Merry Christmas!